My name's Christopher Swain, and hey, and I first got to know Tom Matlack because we were both rowing crew at Wesleyan together. So I think there's a long and windy road to how I came to be talking tonight, but that would be the easiest connection that I could make. What I wanted to try to talk about tonight was the notion of separateness and feeling separate and alone, and what I came to understand about that in the course of some of my work. And I recognized when I glanced at the bio, like that's the bio I send out for all my like swim talks and everything else. And I think when I read it, I realize even that has in the language sort of embedded some of the sense of what I'm going to talk about, in the sense that I think when we write bios about the things we do, it tends to be in the context of, someone who did these things, in isolation, like this guy did this stuff or this woman did this stuff. And even the bio itself kind of got me thinking, like, that's not the whole story. And the title, when they were asking me for the title, I was at the time thinking a lot about the call, like when you feel called to do something. And I will touch on that. But I think more what I went through around my experience of being separate and alone, or perceiving myself that way, is kind of what I want to get to with all of you. So I'll back up, and some of you know this and some of you don't, but uh, my quick version of my story, I had the standard kind of ACOA childhood. Like there's a lot of addiction in my family. Like we joke, if you go back on both sides of my family like 500 years, like everybody was drunk and or on a ship, probably all the way back on both sides. And that's actually not that much of an exaggeration. And so that the disease is deep in the family, and everybody's got the wiring, if and the thinking. And I think that's a piece of the story. But certainly as a kid growing up in a family where there was addiction and violence and the rest of it, I definitely learned that uh, love and connection and belonging weren't reliably available. It didn't feel like a safe place necessarily. And I always hesitate to air these things out, but I think sometimes it's good to say a couple things. Like both my parents, and I think they learned this from their parents probably, made use of violence as a tool. And I think many parents did when we were growing up. I sometimes tell my kids, like, you have no idea what used to go on. But anyway, I only put that in the space because I think that for a little kid can lead you to feeling kind of alone in some ways. It doesn't lead to a feeling of unity, I think, physical interpersonal violence. My parents were also both violent with each other as well as with my sisters and I. And on a couple of occasions, I think that sort of came to a head for me. One way it did, where I ended up feeling alone, was in sixth grade. I remember going through there was some kind of big family meeting and sort of argument after that. And I remember in the meeting trying to say, well, I was trying to find a way to say, hey, the feeling in this house, the fear that I'm feeling, how on edge everybody is, really reminds me of like what's going on at school. Because I'd switched schools and I'd gone to this, like, they took me out of public school and put me in a private school, and that where I was the new kid. Like most of the kids in my grade were had been together like since kindergarten or first grade, and they like told me on the first day, they're like, yeah, no offense, nothing personal, but like we're just going to beat on you every day because you're new, and that'll be for the year, and then next year it will end. So I okay. So I was getting like these daily beatings, and I remember thinking I wanted to say in this like family meeting at home, like, I don't like what's going on at home, and I don't like what's going on in school either. And it didn't go well. I didn't manage to say any of that. And I'm going to be nice to my sixth grade self. It's hard to say those things. So my parents went out after that. And I told my sister Amanda, I said, I'm running away. I'm done. And she freaked out. I didn't realize this was my plan, but I did. I took off. I went down to Richdale's, a convenience store, on my bike, and I looked in my backpack, and I remember I had enough money to buy a strawberry yogurt. That seemed like the best thing I could buy of the things I had with the change. And then, they gave me a spoon thing, and I went and I rode my bike back toward my house, and then I went behind this wall, like stone wall that was like by this like forested area. And I went in there with like my sleeping bag and all this, and I like the little tarp, and I made a little campsite, and I was gonna um I don't know not what the hell my plan was, but I ate the yogurt, and then it started to get dark, and then the mosquitoes are biting me, and I like wrap myself up in the sleeping bag and go to sleep. I kept waking up all night long though, because the police and the fire department and the search and rescue and everybody was zooming all around looking for me. And I remember thinking it's like really hard to sleep with all this noise, because this was a road you'd use to get to my house. So there was a lot of traffic. And then I remember thinking the mosquitoes are really bad. And then I remember thinking there's no way I'm going home now, because they're going to kill me, right? There's just no way am I going back there. But then I was like, but what's the plan, right? No, like I'm out of money. This wasn't well planned. So I couldn't take it by like, when it started getting light at 4 o'clock in the morning, I remember thinking, this is so bad with the mosquitoes now, and cold. Sleeping bag. I don't know if any of you had these crappy, like sometimes like Cub Scouts, they give you like these crappy sleeping bags, but they were kind of like cotton, like almost, and fabric, so like they would get wet, they wouldn't really work. But it was like, to be a kid, you get this sleeping bag and you can have this pretend camping experience. So that's probably why. And I remember thinking, if I go home, they're gonna beat me, and I don't know what'll happen, but I don't really know where else to go. So my idea was, I'm gonna go home and hide. So I started going back, and then I realized pretty quickly there are so many people around my house that this is going to be really hard. But somehow I managed to ditch my bike. I snuck in the house. I can't believe I made it by all these people and my parents and the police, everyone. I managed to get into the house, and all the way up to the third floor of my room was. And then I was like, wait, they're going to, this is stupid. So then I pulled my bed out from the wall a little bit, and I went and I lay down behind my bed, and then I tried to pull the bed back in. So I'm like, no one will know I'm here. And people were in and out of my room all the time, and I could hear them like going through my stuff and everything. I later found out that they were looking for pictures of me to like give to the state police and all this kind of stuff. They were looking like, did I write a note? I don't know, all these things, like going through everything, and what clues to find out where I was. And I was lying there, and I remember feeling so alone, like, oh my God, I feel so alone. Like, and I couldn't language it at the time, but it was like, I didn't have a way to tell the people, like, I don't feel good about what's happening to me at home. I don't feel good what's happening to me at school. I don't have anywhere else to go, but I want to hide from all of you. And I really feel like out of options, and like worse than the beating is the lonely feeling. And that kind of got to the point where I was decided, well, I feel so yucky now that I would just take the beating. So I was listening. There was a time when no one was in the room, I thought. And so I pushed the bed a little bit from the wall the other way so I could look through a crack. And then I saw the next person that came in the room was my mom. And she was like sitting at my desk and like pulling like a picture. There was like pictures on my desk, like of like me and my sister and stuff. So she was like pulling pictures out, which turns out was to give to people so they could look for me. And she's crying. And somehow is like, okay, like I'm gonna risk it. So I like came up from behind the bed, and then like onto the bed, but she didn't. And I was like, hey, and she freaks out because, of course, fair enough, she has no idea that I'm in the room, and she didn't like go get violent or anything else. We had a whole thing about it, but the long story short was that I felt like I had really like inconvenienced a whole hell of a lot of people, and they were upset, but they were trying to not get mad and get violent about it when I was there. So I really remember that feeling. Like this didn't go, I didn't feel good. I couldn't find the language for it. This has been going on so long, I'm out of options. I run away. I come back because the loneliness is worse than the fear of the beating that I'm going to get. I make myself like vulnerable again or expose myself again. And like all I really get is the sense that everyone's upset, but trying not to be upset. So that kind of isolation thing, I really remember as a childhood thing. So flash forward to the winter or the midwinter of 2001, 2002. So I'm halfway done with a swim that's going to be a 1,243-mile swim down the entire length of the Columbia River in support of clean water and dislocated peoples in the Columbia River Basin. So it's like a 2,000-kilometer swim. It's out in the Pacific Northwest. The river goes all the way, it starts up in Canada, goes down through Washington, Oregon, dumps into the Pacific. And the reason I was swimming is that I wanted to, shine a light on the environmental issues, like everything that happened when the 14 dams that were built on the main stem Columbia River basically wiped out the biggest fishery on the planet, flooded millions of acres of land, dislocated peoples, European and indigenous peoples on both sides of the border, and ended all the way of life for all the salmon based cultures and the rest of it, and displaced hundreds of thousands of people, like of every color and the rest of it. And this didn't feel right to me in my heart, which would make sense if, to me, and, imagine me like, okay, the clean water activists, the human rights, the universal human rights activists didn't feel right. So I'm doing this swim. And I lived in Oregon. And one of the things that I ran into there was people are like, you can't advocate for the river really because, you're born in Massachusetts, you're not from Oregon, people aren't going to listen to you. If you go over to Washington, they're going to say you live in Oregon and you should shut up. If you go to Canada, you're not Canadian, you should shut up. All these kind of things. And I had gotten the idea, the the feeling actually, when I had sort of fallen in love with the river when I had first moved out there, and this is what I would describe as a call, like a feeling deep in me that what I should do would be swim the entire length of the river, talk to as many people as I could about the experiences that they were having, that they had, and then figure out how to help. Like I deeply felt that that was the way to go. I don't know why I got going in this, but I really felt it. And the more it disturbed me because this was not like my plan. The more I prayed about it, the more I thought about it, the stronger it felt in me. So for those of you who are wondering if you've ever felt a call to do something, you'll know if you feel a call to do something because what it'll end up as the feeling, something along the lines of you'll realize you can't not do this thing. Like you're going to need to do this thing or you're not going to be okay. Like it's a deep thing like that. Like you'll feel it in your body. So I had felt that and I was going, and that helped me get through like the blistering ice cream headache, swimming in like 37-degree water through snowstorms, and dealing with the fact that it was difficult to raise money for the swim, and I was always struggling to pay bills and whatever else. And I'd only figured out how to save up enough money and not work for 6 months, like, and come back intermittently and do this. And then I was like 7 months into the swim and I was only halfway done. And to be fair, I'd gone through like rapids and canyons and like glacial meltwater, and no one had ever swum the Columbia River in history. No one's probably ever going to do it again. And I was running into things, but they were normal things that you would expect as someone tried to swim a river through the wilderness. Like, and the large wilderness areas made it logistically complicated as well. Like only things up there were like problem bears that the RCMP had let go. There were like no roads. There's no one up there, up in the Wood River confluence area, the Big Bend. So the big thing I ended up battling, besides all the fun things to talk about, like the cold water and problem bears and the rest of it, is the loneliness. And I think I've recognized some of that feeling, like the feeling like, yeah, I chose this and this and this, but I'm really alone. Like, this is just me. And I think I didn't connect that to the childhood wound, but I did recognize the feeling. And I think I should say that this feeling was familiar. And I think there's a way as an athlete that and as a man, that I move toward that feeling. I'm not saying it was so good for me to feel alone, like, or I'm on this road alone, or I'm doing this swim alone, because of course, technically I'm not. I have some support and some crew help and the rest of it. But like that feeling, like, yeah, man, but you're kind of alone. And we do joke in the athlete world, like a lot of times, like, you're born alone, you die alone, you race alone. Like you can be in a marathon surrounded by all these other people running, and you look around and you're like, you know what, everybody's in their own little hell here. Like, we're together, but everybody's got to go walk their road. So it is sort of reinforced by some of that experience. And I also felt, though, 7 months in, less than halfway done, like that I was going to quit. Like a part of me couldn't deal anymore with that lonely feeling. So it was familiar, but I couldn't freaking take it. And I was still, to my credit, I'm only saying this because this is hard for me as a guy, like saying I prayed or I asked God for help. There's still this little part of me that thinks like that's not tough enough. Like I still kind of want to self will it. I still kind of want to be like, yeah, fuck it, man. This is all me. And I understand, like, as we get older, we're supposed to be less and less enamored of that. But I still had some of that going on in my early 30s. I'm sure I still do now, but now I'm like, now I know it's BS, but then I was still kind of wanting that. So I was still praying, but there was another part of me that was like, this isn't going to work, and I might not be able to do this, and I really need help. Like, can someone please come and help me? And my story that I got going in my head is, oh, well, this praying isn't freaking working. I'm just going broke and freezing my ass and feeling lonely. And I'm doing a decent job of getting the word out, but what the hell? How am I ever going to finish? Right around this time, I was coming I just come over the US border and drop down into central Washington state. This is in the winter. And the right hand side of the river, when you do that on the Columbia River, is a Colville Indian Reservation. Huge reservation, like huge meaning bigger than Yosemite, like a huge freaking piece of land. And I got word that there was a spiritual leader there, the head of the Noisy Water Band, this guy whose English language name is Tom Louie, was looking to talk to me. And I was like, all right, how do I find him? And they're like, oh, I mean, just go down to the Inchelium, this town in the res, and like ask at the community center of the school, and someone will like show you how to find his house. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I eventually tracked him down, but by the time I tracked him down, it was like night and it was snowing, like I'd burned a whole day. I tracked the guy down, I knocked on his door. He opens the door, he looks at me, and my first sense of this person, I don't know if you ever met anyone like this, like it wasn't so much that he had like charisma, but that he had like a real rootedness about him. Like I almost felt like this guy's like more grounded than a tree. So just being near him, you feel like everyone's like really, I don't know how to say it, but just something like, whoa, okay, this is not the norm. And I just looked at him and I was trying to think of what to say, and he said, hey, I was about to give up until I heard about what you were doing. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? Okay, you were about to give up? Because I'm thinking like, first of all, hi, I'm Christopher. And my story is I'm about to give up, and you're a spiritual leader. Like, don't be giving up here. I need help. Like I don't say that, but I'm like, you can't give up because I need. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, I'm about to throw it all in the wind. And I'm like, oh Christ, is this thing he's going to kill himself? Like, does that mean I can't kill myself or drown? Like, I was like, wait a second, this is upside down. And he's like, let me tell you a story. Come in. So I sat by the fire and tell me a story. He's like, look, I'm a grandfather now. He was in his 60s. And oh God, I didn't turn that crap on. And I'm a father and a grandfather now. But I remember when I was 4 years old, and my grandfather, whose name was Ksus, was walking with me, and he brought me up above Kettle Falls. So Kettle Falls is one of the sets of waterfalls where Native peoples used to spearfish for salmon, like Celilo Falls, that was covered over when Grand Coulee Dam went in. So it was inundated by the waters of Grand Coulee Dam. So it's now dozens of feet underwater. So there's pictures of it. There's beautiful waterfalls that the salmon would jump up. Anyway, there's a big hill on one side, and he said he remembers standing up there with his grandfather in the early 1940s. So like 1941 before they dropped the fish ladder. They didn't. Okay, they put Grand Coulee Dam in, but no, with no fish ladder. So long story short, he's like, we were standing up there, and the people were all gathered, and they were fishing. And my grandfather says to me, he's like, look, I'm not a rich man, Tom. I don't really have anything. But he said, when I stand up here and I see like the people all gathered here fishing and everybody doing ceremony and the kids like running races and everybody out gathering like roots and everything and all the fishing going on and all the other tribes are here trading and stuff. I look at all this and I think, you know what? I feel like a rich man. Like I can leave you here and you're going to have fish to eat. You're going to have people to look after and take care of you. You're going to have like roots and vegetables and stuff to eat. You're going to have the people gathering here like twice a year for the salmon runs. And you're going to have the sound of the water to put you to sleep at night. And I like, you're going to be okay. Like, I feel like a rich man leaving you all this. And he said his grandfather did, die like grandfathers do. And he like held that in his heart. But of course, in 1941, they dropped Grand Coulee Dam in. It created a 125-mile lake behind it. Because it had no fish ladder, it cut off the upper part of the Columbia River from all the salmon runs. So the biggest thing about this, the biggest fishery on the planet was the Columbia River. Wipes out when you start putting these dams. So this is gone. So every single native person in every salmon-based culture from there all the way up into Canada, no one says, hey, guess what? No more fish. Your culture's about to collapse. No one told them. So house fires, drug addiction, alcoholism, everything goes rippling through like the Native American First Nations community. Flash ahead to when I'm swimming, which is like the early 2000s. And he said, when I go up there now, Christopher, when I stand up on that same hill, obviously I can't see Kettle Falls anymore because it's underwater. But if I go up there and stand there with my grandson, he said, I think I have nothing to leave him. I have nothing. It's all gone. The fish is gone. The people don't gather anymore. The falls are gone. Even the river's gone. It's a lake now. It's all gone. Like everything I knew is gone. And he said, I feel like I have nothing to leave my children. And that's the worst thing of all. To feel like you were poor, but you had this. And he said, I don't even have that. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's a lot. And he's like, can you do me a favor? And I was like, well, yeah. And he's like, will you go tell my story? Like you're out there saying, let's take out the dams. Let's let the river be a river. Let's make it right with the people who we dislocated. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm saying all those things. And he's like, and I can tell it's in your heart to do those things. You're not making any money doing this. And he said, and I see sometimes you're on the news and stuff. And that's how I found out about you. Will you tell my story? And I'm like, I feel weird telling your story, man. Like you should tell your story. I'll give you, you can use my platform to tell your story. Like, I'll introduce you to media people or whatever. I'm sure I can even bring you to like one of these UN ceremonies and stuff that I get invited to, and you could speak at the UN. And he said, no, I want you to do this. I want you to tell my story. And I'm like, I feel weird about this. And he's like, let me tell you another story. And he's like, I can see that you're struggling here. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, because you're like, oh, this is your story, and it's you and me, and it's if you feel weird. I'm like, right, yeah, that's right. I feel weird. And he's like, okay. He said, Christopher, I didn't grow up speaking English. None of us did. Right? We got shoved into the Indian schools. We were made to go, and we weren't allowed to speak any English when we went. But I grew up speaking the old language. We all did. That's the language we spoke for thousands of years. If you ask the social, what do you call it, the anthropologists and the sociologists, they're like, somewhere like 50,000 years we were speaking Salish based language group languages. So he said, in the old language, you couldn't say what you just said to me. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, okay, let me give you an example. In the old language, we're the noisy water band, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, we're the noisy water band because this area has all these rapids where you just swam through. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, in the old language, I can't make this sentence. I can't say, I'm here and the river's over there. I'm like, well, why can't you? He's like, because we can't. It doesn't exist grammatically. He's like, I can say, we are here. I can't say, the river is there and I'm here. I'm like, you can't? He's like, no, I can say, we're here. He's like, we're the noisy water people because there is no distinction that we made between us and the river. And I was like, whoa, all right. And he's like standing there watching me like figure it out. And what I'm figuring out is, oh wow, so if you don't have the language for separation, you can't think the thought of separation. So he's like, until they forced us into those schools to learn English, we couldn't even talk like this. We never thought like this. He's like, but you guys do, when you came in here and you had this idea that you're separate from nature and you're separate from the river. And worst of all, you're separate from each other. And of course, look at the mess we're in. So he's like, listen, it's not my story. I just told you this story. So you're a part of it now. It's our story. Will you please go down the river, finish your swim, and tell this story? And I was like, okay. And right then I decided, all right, I guess I'm going to find a way to finish this swim. And I did. I ended up swimming 165 days over 13 months. I went through all kinds of crazy conditions to do it. I stopped, I worked odd jobs, I did everything I had to do, and I did do it. I told his story on NPR and CNN and even at the United Nations, and stories about the swim and dislocated peoples and like the separation between us and nature like reached, I think our total like media impressions for the swim was like 2 billion people or something, worldwide. And now here I am 20 years later or whatever, sharing with you. Tom Louis dead. I live in, I'm an asshole, right? So that's choose it. uh I'm not in Oregon anymore, and it's really tempting, despite everything I've learned and everything I just said to you, to still think of myself as separate. Like, I'm still the guy that did all these things and that all these things happened to. And I'm still the kid who seeks out kind of the experience of feeling alone and feels that loneliness and that wound. And I think if Tom were here still, and I think he is in some way, what he would want me to say is like, or to remind me of, and maybe remind me to tell you is like, it's tempting to believe that, I'm here and you are all wherever you are on Zoom in your homes and in your offices. And Tom's in the ground somewhere in central Washington state. And the Columbia River is 3,600 miles from here, and I'm on speaker and you're all muted. And I think the only thing that we actually know for sure is something else. And I think that is that we are all here. We're here right now together. And that's the gift that I carry forward from Tom. And the thing that I ask you all to think about and reflect on and share with me tonight is in that space. Like, we're men. And the story is, it's always comes down to one man against the world, and one man against the wilderness. And like, I'm going to do it, God damn it, and just me. And it's going to be me. And if I really want to get it done, well, let's get rid of everyone else and do it myself. And that's deep in the culture. And it's easy to forget, as you all know, in those moments. Like, to ask God for help, to ask other people for help, to not get into the temptation to go back to the familiar feeling that you are alone. And maybe you're effed too and alone. And I know that feeling, and I remember that feeling, and that feeling led me to almost giving up on, this dream, this difficult thing that I was trying to do. And my story, even at the time, was that the prayers weren't working and I wasn't getting the help. But I think I did. I just didn't see it at the time. So, what I'd love to know from all of you is if any of you have known that kind of loneliness. And if so, like how you found your way through. And have you had moments when, tempting as it was and seductive as it was to believe it was just you and it sucked, that in the end you weren't alone? And also, if any of you had moments where you had like the seduction of feeling separate, like you're not part of anything, you're not part of the family, you're alone, and you saw yourself as apart from other people and stuff. Did you ever have moments when you felt that you were one and that there were those moments of unity when you were with other people or with nature or anything else, like found your way together? Because I think of the many challenges that I faced as a man, this is probably one of the hardest ones for me. As as much as I want to have conscious contact with God and see myself part of a web of community and feel connected to all of you and to other men and stuff and other humans and to the living world. And even though it shows up in my work to do these things, there's a way in which I still want to believe that, you know what, we're all here alone and it's going to end up back that way. It's going to be me kind of gutting this out like that little kid. Nobody's really listening. Nobody really cares. God's not really answering my prayers, and I'm just kind of going that way. And despite the reminders, so I'll cling to that illusion of separateness.
Hmm.
So thank you all for listening.